have to review the whole thing, or whether we rather have a targeted approach to say, we're going to look at, let's say, EMA, do we need an emergency type of marketing authorization like the UK and the US have it? So that would vaccine approvals, right? So, I mean, that would be a targeted approach, which I think would be better to have than going full-fledged on every little piece of legislation. I think that's a huge exercise. But I can also see some criticism, if I may say that, coming in from the perspective of affordability, because we're addressing affordability very much at the national level in HTAs, pricing discussions with SEPs, GKVSV in Germany, and so on. So it's not, some people in Brussels seem to think that there's no pricing exercise, but that's exactly, it's happening at the member state level. So I do see the complexity to answer that question, and I understand also the concern too.
Yeah, it's definitely an ambitious approach. So maybe we should talk about that for a while then, the European pharmaceutical strategy. As you mentioned, 20 years on, a review was needed, and obviously COVID became a catalyst as well for that. Back in March last year, at the State of Union address, then there was sort of the birth, if you like, of the EU pharmaceutical strategy, and there were various reasons for that. Obviously, COVID was one of them, and learnings from COVID. As you mentioned already, the access and affordability of medicines was another sort of major catalyst, as well as the looking at sustainable innovation and also digital healthcare as well, and making sure, are we using the most of that throughout Europe? And the last one, again, sort of linked very much with COVID, one of the catalysts was very much focused on the medicine shortages and making sure that we're not running out of essential supplies, and sort of, I guess, reducing our autonomy, if you like, and making sure that we can manage things ourselves within Europe rather than relying on other regions throughout the world. And as you mentioned, there are several different priorities of the pharmaceutical strategy. The first one of which I wanted to sort of touch on, because it's very close to my heart at least, is the access and affordability. And how feasible is that? Because, you know, we're talking about this at the EU level across all the different member states. And one of the things that has been talked about or proposed is looking at the EU HTA approach coming into place in this year. How feasible do you think that is, especially when you just mentioned there from a pricing perspective? How feasible is it that we can harmonise that approach across Europe?
Yeah, very good question, and critical question from the industry perspective, Sophie, and that's really very close to our heart in industry. I think that the past has shown that it can be done at the national level to have pricing discussions, but industry, of course, would very much appreciate a joint HTA submission process, because we're talking about one product, and to harmonize and to align on what type of studies and endpoints should be submitted to an HTA wherever it's sitting. It will likely be sitting in Brussels in terms of decision-making process. That would be very helpful to have a one-stop shop from the industry perspective. And UCOP and also other trade organizations in Brussels have been very much opting for what we called option 4 some years ago in the impact assessment for the joint HTA. And actually, that's a critical point for discussion, really. I think from the industry perspective, it can be considered as a red line that when we're doing that exercise, industry is happy, I think, at least most of the trade organizations we've been talking to. I haven't heard any other voices in Brussels, really. To have one HTA file, to have one comparator, one endpoint, and then one file at the end of the day. But that means that this is then legally binding as a decision-making process on the member states, and that the member states would do their price negotiations on the basis of that one HTA. And that's not so secure, because doing an HTA also means choosing the comparator. And I think with the bigger member states, such as Germany and to a certain extent also some other member states, are not really so happy to give away that power to others. Because choosing the comparator means you choosing a price of a comparator as well. And if I have a cheap and low price comparator, I have an issue as a pharma company to establish a very good price, because I have to show a very significant benefit over the comparator then to get a good price. So it's all about choosing the comparator, and there's a big discussion. The German compromise has been circulated, I think, in November, December last year. That was, in our opinion, pretty much weakening the legally binding effect of this HTA submission. It was allowing for resubmissions at the national level to a certain extent. It was not that clearly spelled out, but it was watering down that principle, which the Commission rightfully had foreseen to do. So we do it here at the Brussels level. We're going to decide later on what the methodology is and which persons are involved in that process, but it's legally binding. And I think that's a red line for industry. I understand that's also the red line for the European Parliament these days, at least. Yeah. So I'm not saying we're stuck, but there is a big discussion about this critical point.
Yeah, absolutely. The legally binding point is critical, as well as you talked about the comparator there, the choice of comparator. And I think that there is a potential to sort of split that and look at the clinical comparator, because there is potentially more harmonisation and alignment on what that clinical comparator should be versus obviously the price comparator, which potentially is something that needs to be managed at a local member state level. But certainly, I mean, I would like to see not only more collaboration between HTAs and the EMA in terms of scientific advice. I know that's one of the proposals of the EU pharmaceutical strategy. I'd like to go further. I'd like to actually have a look at more harmonisation with regulatory bodies across the world, because, as you know, many of the pharmaceutical companies struggle with, okay, I've got the FDA want one thing, the EMA want something else, and then you actually get to an HTA level, they want something else. And so is there an opportunity to really seek greater international collaboration, do you think, at a regulatory and HTA level?
Yeah, I mean, the right... Yeah.